I dreamt for so long. My flesh was dull gold, and my blood rotted.
Hello, friends. So you might have seen a certain Polygon article floating around the internet regarding one of FromSoft's most recognizable characters, Malenia, Blade of Miquella. I've seen a few responses to the article, but felt an urge to put forward my own perspective on the topic. As a fellow female video game enthusiast who happens to make lore videos on YouTube, this article really missed the mark for me for several reasons. The author takes issue with the way From Software writes female characters in their video games, claiming that they all fall into two types, either quiet helpmeets or predictable obstacles for the player. There is an obvious issue with claiming all of a specific character gender fits into two very tiny, very simplistic boxes, but I think what the article fails to point out are the very nuanced relationships you can and do have with each character. This also inadvertently reduces the storylines of all the female characters we meet in the lands between by the article's author, not the developers. Each one of these so-called quiet helpmeets has a very unique backstory, a questline, and a personality all of their own. They also want vastly different things from each other. Latenna wishes to be taken to the Halig Tree, Ronnie wants to defy the Greater Will and create a new age, Nefeli Lu wants to find purpose and help the downtrodden, and Millicent wants to find out where she comes from. Even that doesn't sum up everything that makes each of these women interesting and their stories so worthwhile. The reductive language the author uses suggests their own feelings about these characters more so than the intention of the writers and developers. Everyone is, of course, allowed their own opinion and perspective, but the problem is that the author frames this as an undeniable fact. It's in fact the developers who wrote these characters as shallow, not that she perceives them that way. Another point I disliked about the article was the way the author genders things that do not need to be gendered. For example, she states that the fight with Malenia, quote, is designed to thwart and emasculate the player, and that, quote, success over her took on a weird masculinized chest beating at times. Nothing about Malenia's boss battle made me feel like she was intentionally depriving men of their male roles or identities, probably because I am not a man, but also because I don't think From Software intended to evoke that feeling. As a woman who grew up playing video games, I can tell you wholeheartedly that it is immensely exciting to see the big bad boss be a woman. Far too many games in the past struggled to write dynamic female characters. Many of them were simply background pieces or in need of rescuing from the player. Now, let's get one thing straight. Malenia is not a background piece, nor is she in need of any rescuing. Malenia is a force to be reckoned with, and the game reminds you of this every time she beats you over and over and over again. I also find her to be one of the most representative characters in Elden Ring. She's voiced by a woman of color, she's a triple amputee, and she's blind. And on top of that, From Software wrote her as the most powerful demigod in the lands between. When describing her boss battle, the author also claims that, quote, the audience's hostile and competitive attitudes about it are often steeped in gendered toxicity, and that, quote, when faced with a difficult, defiant woman who has never been beaten, men cannot help but fantasize about being the one to take her down. These claims are reaching for something that is simply not there. The idea that male players want to defeat Malenia solely for the fact that she is a woman. This is absolutely ridiculous and a bit frustrating to read if I'm being completely honest. Malenia is a shard bearer, and the entire goal of the game is to collect shards and become Elden Lord. It really is that simple. If anything, the inclusion of female bosses is a breath of fresh air for many gamers. It's a departure from the idea that women are fragile and innocent, always destined to sit on the sidelines. Malenia is also not defiant towards the player, she is defiant towards the world around her and the gods that have forsaken her and her twin, the same way that Ranni is defiant. Instead of being portrayed as docile and obedient, they are both written with self-agency, rejecting the wills of others thrusted upon them and prioritizing their own. Many players, male and female, enjoy the addition of Malenia in the demigod roster, not because they can't wait to defeat her, but because she is a genuinely interesting and difficult to beat character. Very briefly, the article touches on the recurring theme of From Software's female characters being disfigured, abandoned, or experiencing loss. This is to suggest that the writers cannot write a strong woman who isn't actively suffering. The problem here is that everyone in the lands between is suffering. That's the whole point. This world is deeply broken and no one is spared from its harsh, cruel reality. The author describes Malenia in varying ways, such as terrifying, hostile, and emotionless. Quote, "Their emotions are muted in their more docile counterparts before erupting into a shrieking, horrifying hysteria when encountered in combat. Malenia came across to me more as disciplined rather than emotionless due to her training and experience as a swordstress. Her calm demeanor is in stark contrast to the other female shardbearer, Renala, Queen of the Full Moon. Neither of them, quote, erupt into a shrieking, horrifying hysteria, but they also don't react the same to the challenging Tarnished. Renala is a broken person who is grief-stricken and obsessive, while Malenia is determined and unflinching. Renala relies on her daughter's enchantment to protect her due to her current state of mind, while Malenia pulverizes you for even daring to set foot in the Haligtree. Later in the article, the writer seems to take issue with Malenia having daughters, or more accurately called offshoots in the game. Quote, "All roads in FromSoft's games lead back to women being mothers, even terrifying sword maidens." I'm not really sure what the author wants Malenia to be. On one hand, they seem to take grievance with Malenia's quiet, stoic demeanor, claiming it to be masculine in nature, but then on the other seems to take issue with her potentially being a mother, stating that this is what all the women in FromSoft games end up being. This is a gross overgeneralization of the many considerably different and complex female characters across FromSoft's creations. I actually really enjoyed the presence of both motherhood and fatherhood in the Lands Between, because the main story revolves around several royal families, and families are built upon lineage. It would feel really odd if Queen Renala, Radagon, and Godfrey were all omitted from the game. So I don't quite see the problem with Malenia having some sort of offshoot or daughters. It just kind of makes sense with the story. And lastly, the article dances around the topic of whether or not Malenia was the aggressor in the Battle of Caelid. They point to the online community and the game's cinematic trailer, which depicts General Radahn and Malenia's epic battle. Quote, "It's not hard to imagine how this would influence the audience into seeing her as an aggressor. It spurred fan discussion about how her transformation was cheating, an otherwise fair fight. This is missing a crucial piece of lore evidence found very easily in the game. Malenia marched her army into Caelid. Malenia was indeed the aggressor because she was an invader. This is simply a fact in the story, not something disgruntled fans made up. Either way, having her as an opposing force to Caelid and General Radahn makes her a more complex and interesting character. It's what makes her a good character. In my opinion, a good female character is not morally good or evil. She is not defined by her heightened emotions or lack of them. Rather, a good female character is one that has complex emotions and motives. One that is not bound by stereotypes or tropes, but instead has their own will and desires that feel authentic to them. Whether or not their actions are good or bad is completely irrelevant. I really do think this article missed the point of Malenia's character and the story that the writers at From Software were trying to portray. I also found a lot of the language that was used to be mildly misogynistic, which was ironic seeing as the author was attempting to point out the game's misogyny, but I digress. Anyways, I know this was a bit of a different video from me, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video down below and subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more from me in the future. I can't wait to talk to you all in the next one. Bye!